In the first 5 episodes of this series, we followed the historic Carpentersville to Yorkville trolley system, traveling by bicycle, automobile, and foot from Carpentersville in North Kane County through West Dundee, next passing through the extensive street railway system of Elgin, then South Elgin, and the Fox River Trolley Museum, crossing over the river at 5 Islands, back west across the river, then trekking through St. Charles, and jockeying through Geneva. In Part 6 of this Fox River Trolley series, we'll continue south, this time traveling through the historic city of Batavia, Illinois, learning of its vivid history, the much-anticipated arrival of the Fox River Trolley system, as well as a noteworthy legacy of the city's many railroads.
In our previous video, we left off south of Geneva at Batavia Road, today's Lincoln Highway and Illinois Route 31, just south of Fabian Parkway, where the trolley line bent back southwest from the riverbank towards the road. We now head south along Route 31, just as the electric interurban did 100 years ago, where it traveled along the east side of the road. The first stop, about 1,000 feet along this stretch, was Laurelwood Siding, stop number 30. At this stop, the trolley linked up with a ferry, which would convey passengers across the water to Laurelwood Park, set along the east bank of the Fox River. Like many other similar venues along the Fox River, Laurelwood Park was a bucolic amusement venue, built by the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad in 1897 as an excursion destination for Fox River and Chicagoland residents. The 50-acre park featured a bandstand, dance pavilion, horse racing, and a boat launch. Once the Kane County Fairgrounds, the venue was very popular in the late 1890s and continued on for decades thereafter, although much less visited after a devastating fire in 1901. The parkland was eventually acquired by the Batavia Park District, and a much subdued and scaled-down version of the location can be visited today along Logan Street on the east side of the Fox River.
We next pass by the generically named Stop 29, about where Timber Trail Road intersects with Route 31. Another 1,000 feet brings us to Stop 28, the Fox Terrace stop, about where Maple Lane intersects with the road. A short distance further, we pass North Avenue, where Stop 27 was located. The next stop south was Illinois Avenue. From here, as in other cities and towns, streetcars in Batavia would stop at just about every block to pick up or drop off passengers. We next travel past McKee Street, and then Houston Street. Then comes Wilson Street, Batavia's main commercial avenue. Down the street to the east is the iconic Wilson Street Bridge. and at the northwest corner is a Don Carlos Newton House, a former site of the Batavia Public Library in the early part of the 20th century.
At Wilson Street, passengers could have interchanged with the Chicago and Northwestern line, their depot being 1 block to the east, or to the CA&E Interurban, just a few blocks further over the Wilson Street Bridge. Continuing south, we pass by the first street stop. Just shy of Main Street, to the right would have stood the Revere House Hotel, long since torn down, but which played a historic role in Batavia's streetcar story. For it is here where the electric trolley stopped on its first journey northward from Aurora, on Saturday, October 24, 1896, when this segment of the electric railroad was built.
But how did the city of Batavia come to be? Like many of the communities along the Fox River in Illinois, it saw its origin in a small settlement that sprang up along the river shortly after the forced removal of Native Americans from the area, especially after the defeat and eviction of the Sauk chief Black Hawk and his followers in the late summer of 1832. By the autumn of the following year, 47-year-old Christopher Columbus Payne, late of Pennsylvania, his wife Elizabeth, and several children staked a claim on the east side of the Fox River and built a 16-foot square log shanty, where a large island narrowed the Fox River channel to a few hundred feet, for easier crossings when the river was low.
Payne was followed by several other families from the east, and the settlement grew up on both sides of the river. Both Christian Dodson and Joel McKee built the first general stores in Batavia. Titus Howe built the first dam and mill. 53-year-old Isaac Wilson then arrived with his family, Susanna Doran Wilson, and their 9 children from New York, buying out Christopher Payne, who moved north to Walworth County in Wisconsin.
Wilson was a dominant figure in early Batavia. He had been a cavalry captain in the War of 1812 in New York, served in the New York General Assembly, as a judge in Genesee County, New York, as well as a U.S. congressman, before migrating to the Illinois Territory. It was Wilson and 3 others, including his son-in-law Joseph W. Churchill, an Irishman, Joel McKee, and George M. Makepeace, who in the spring of 1843 purchased most of the property from the U.S. government that was to become Batavia.
In the latter half of the 1830s, the Van Nortwicks arrived from New Jersey. 54-year-old William, his wife Martha Flack Van Nortwick, and their 6 children. The Van Nortwicks improved the river dams along the south of the island and erected a sawmill to leverage the river's power. Their milling operations were to eventually expand to include the Batavia Flour Mill and the Batavia Paper Mill. In fact, it was the Van Nortwicks who had a hand in the original platting of the east side of the village in 1837, and then the west side in 1844. It was also at about this time that Isaac Wilson formally gave name to the settlement, that being Batavia, named for his former village in Genesee County, New York.
The first U.S. post office was established in March of 1841, with Isaac Wilson as its postmaster. 44-year-old Xerix Reynolds, who had arrived with his wife, Sarah Cheney, and their 6 children from New York in the late 1830s, established a commercial quarry on the west side of the river.
The next big change for the settlement was a boon, the arrival of the railroad. In 1849, the Aurora Branch Railroad laid a 12-mile track from Turner Junction, today's West Chicago, to Aurora, passing through Batavia, and the first passenger train departed from Batavia at 6:30 p.m. on September 2, 1850. The Aurora Branch Railroad became the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad in 1854, and it was then that Batavia was gifted a new railroad depot, located on the east side of town, just south of Webster and east of Van Buren, quite possibly the first passenger depot built by the historic CB&Q Railroad. It was a broad-eaved wood frame building, approximately 45 feet long by 22 feet wide, with board and batten siding, and of Gothic Revival design.
The railroad triggered growth in the rural community. Additional dry goods stores opened business. Public schools were constructed, as well as a private school, the Batavia Institute, to the southwest of town, which became a candidate for an Illinois State University in the later 1850s. A 6-arch stone bridge replaced the wooden bridge at Wilson Street, costing $9,000, or about $1 million in today's money. Factories were built leveraging the new railroad, building barrels, wagons, and carriages. By the spring of 1856, the citizens of Batavia voted to incorporate as a village. By 1860, the population had grown to more than 1,600 residents.
Almost a dozen stone quarries, harvesting what was known as Batavia limestone, came to line both sides of the river, where dynamite was used to create large slabs that then had to be arduously worked by hammers, chisels, and shovels. Hundreds of buildings and structures in northeastern Illinois were constructed using this Batavia limestone. Houses, office buildings, warehouses, schools, and churches. Much of this stone was used in the rebuilding of Chicago following the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, as well as the construction of Northern Illinois University in DeKalb in the 1890s.
Another major industry to emerge in Batavia was that of windmills, with the first factory being built by Daniel Halliday, the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company, in 1863, followed by Challenge Mills in 1867. The third major windmill manufacturer to arrive was Appleton Manufacturing in 1894. With these three companies, Batavia became known as Windmill City, shipping out their products to places throughout the U.S., Canada, and the world.
Meanwhile, Batavia was blessed with two more railroads in the early 1870s. In the 1871-1872 timeframe, the Fox River Valley Railroad, running north-south, was laid along the west side of town, about a half-mile from the river, traversing from Geneva south to Streator, Illinois. The depot for this railroad was located near the intersection of First Street and Harrison Street. Within a year, in 1873, the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, wishing to gain access to the Batavia limestone quarries, laid tracks from Geneva to Batavia, also opening a passenger depot in May of that year. Their passenger depot was a wood frame structure, about 70 feet by 20 feet wide, facing west, and was located at the northeast corner of Wilson Street and Water Street.
As Batavia continued to expand and improve its public school facilities, the private school, Batavia Institute, set on 16 acres of land to the southwest of town, fell on hard times. In the mid-1860s, the elegant stone building was retrofitted by Dr. Richard J. Patterson as an asylum, specifically accommodating women patients. Without doubt, its most famous patient was Mary Todd Lincoln, wife of Abraham Lincoln, who was committed there against her will in 1875. She was escorted to the Bellevue Asylum by her only living son, Robert, who had had a hand in having her committed, arriving on the Chicago and Northwestern train on May 21st. It was believed that the assassination of Abraham in 1865, as well as the deaths of 3 of her 4 sons, the most recent being of son Todd in 1871, had created within her a profound depression, resulting in somewhat erratic behavior and a general diagnosis of insanity by the medical establishment of the time.
However, she proved sane enough to devise her own release by reaching out to friends and newspapers, putting pressure on Robert to have her discharged to the care of her sister, after just a 4-month stay at the Bellevue Place Asylum. The asylum building yet stands today, at the intersection of Jefferson and Union Streets, although since converted to upscale apartments and condos in the 1990s.
By the 1880s, now 3 decades old and a population of more than 3,500, Batavia was blessed with the public library, located in the Van Nordwyck building on the island. By most measures, the River Valley community had finally arrived and incorporated as a city on June 9, 1891. For the newly coined city, this was indeed Miller time, with the first elected mayor being 37-year-old John H. Miller, a Canadian by birth and a machinist by trade, who later became the general manager of the W.M. Howell Foundries in Geneva. Wilson Street, the city's main thoroughfare, was a relatively busy place, and it was horses and wagons that yet prevailed as a primary form of transportation along this avenue.
Viewers will recall that it was in the spring of 1895 when the electric streetcar companies of both Elgin and Aurora converged on a plan to build a single electric interurban system, connecting both Elgin and Aurora along the Fox River. 3 companies were formed, one to build southward from Carpentersville, a second to build north from Aurora, meeting in the middle at Geneva, with the third extending south from Aurora to Yorkville. The Carpentersville, Elgin, and Aurora Railway was the first out of the gate, with trolleys running from Carpentersville to the south end of Geneva by June 30, 1896. Just a few weeks prior to the completion of this north extension, the Aurora and Geneva Electric Railway was incorporated in the first week of June 1896, with optimistic plans to extend northward from Aurora's streetcar system through North Aurora and Batavia into Geneva by the end of the year.
To complete this work, 30-year-old David A. Belden, then the general manager of the Aurora streetcar system, and also given charge of building the new railroad, would need to obtain approvals or franchises of multiple governing bodies, including Aurora, North Aurora, Batavia, and Geneva, as well as the approval of the Kane County Board of Supervisors for the portions of the route between these communities. Aurora quickly granted a 20-year franchise on the condition that the railway quickly build the extension to Batavia. Batavia's approval came next, although it was not without its drama. In spite of Batavia merchants protesting against the franchise, as they felt that Batavians would do their shopping in Aurora rather than in town, a 20-year franchise was granted by the Batavia City Council on August 1st, with the condition that the street railway be completed and operational by November 1st, that train fares to Aurora would not exceed 15 cents, and that passengers, mail, and baggage only would be carried on these cars.
With 2 primary stakeholders so aligned, Belden lost no time and began construction of the electric road on Monday, August 3rd, with a force of 50 or more men, armed with picks, shovels, plows, scrapers, and accompanied by half as many teamsters and their heavy horses. The trolley line ran along the east side of the gravel wagon road, with a single row of wood trolley poles carrying the electric wire to power the trains. Within 4 weeks, the work crews had graded the line, laid the railroad ties, and installed the rails from Aurora to North Aurora, a distance of almost 2 miles.
On September 11, 1896, the Kane County Board of Supervisors granted a 20-year franchise to the railroad to pass along the county roads between Aurora and Geneva, in spite of vehement protests from landowners north of Batavia and south of Geneva, a topic which we explored in detail in our previous video.
Wiring the trolley poles took only a few weeks, and the first trains were running between Aurora and North Aurora by October 4th, with a fare of 5 cents. Meanwhile, construction continued northward at a rapid pace, and the trackway was laid to within a half-mile of the south end of Batavia. The second week of October saw Lincoln Highway in Batavia torn up from its southern limits to a few blocks north to Wilson Street, and by the middle of October, the track was almost complete between North Aurora and Batavia.
Then on Saturday, October 24th, with much anticipation by the local population, the electric road from Aurora to Batavia was finally opened. Just a few minutes before noon, the first official trip was made on a special car from Aurora's transfer station, with the Aurora and Geneva Railway President, Robert B. Dodson, city officials of both Aurora and Batavia, highway commissioners, and the local press. The ride to Batavia was without incident and easily made the trip in 30 minutes, and then finally ending at the Revere Hotel in Batavia Center. Although pleased, Dodson remarked that there would be no major celebrations until the railway was completed into Geneva the following spring.
Thereafter, train cars ran every half hour, and a horse-drawn bus could take passengers from the Revere Hotel to the CE&A station at Geneva's southern limit, where they could continue northward. The fare between Aurora and Batavia was fixed at 10 cents, about $3.50 in 2025 money. Newspapers remarked that the road was smooth, solid, and substantial, and that its completion was of great interest to Kane County residents. There remained but 3 miles of track to build from Batavia to Geneva to complete the line from Aurora to Carpentersville. But as we discussed in our previous video, this did not happen until early 1901, just as the electric railroad was abruptly sold to a Cleveland syndicate, headed by Maurice J. Mandelbaum and Fred T. Pomeroy.
Not surprisingly, as the Fox River trolley system slowly moved to fruition in the final years of the 19th century, the steam railroads along the Fox River had taken notice of a sharp decline in ridership on their own north-south lines, and so they responded with scheduling and pricing to compete with the electric railway. The Chicago and Northwestern, for example, launched an hourly service between Aurora and Geneva, with comparable fares as the trolley system.
As it turns out, the city of Batavia played even-steven with railroads in the 1890s, adding the Aurora and Geneva Electric Railway, but losing the Oswego, Ottawa, and Fox River Valley Railroad. The latter railroad did not go away, but was bought out by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, meaning that the CB&Q now had 2 depots in Batavia. However, the former Fox River Valley branch became solely freight service within a few years' time.
Batavia, too, was going through its own changes as it rolled into the 20th century. In 1902, city officials sought to extend Wilson Street westward to allow a better flow of traffic from east to west. However, the Italianate mansion of the estate of Levi Newton stood squarely in the path of the proposed extension. His widow, Mrs. Mary Newton, set the asking price for the property at $10,000, about $300,000 in today's money. Not unreasonable given the property's features. But the city refused. Instead, she donated the house and property to Batavia's public library, which gladly accepted and moved into the upscale residence, taking advantage of its large interior spaces.
Another division of the electric trolley system, owned by the Cleveland Syndicate, the Aurora, Elgin, and Chicago Railroad, made some major additions to the east side of Batavia in 1902. As they were building a major new interurban serving Chicago and western suburbs, extending to the Fox River Valley, and as there were no major electric utility companies from which to purchase electricity, the AE&C built their own large electric power plant in the southeast corner of Batavia, along the Fox River. Here was constructed a large building, built of Batavia limestone, with a smokestack 240 feet tall. The original build included 4 generators, with a massive 2,200 horsepower engine, fueled by 8 coal-fired boilers, consuming 5 million gallons of water per day. The water was brought in via huge wooden underground pipes that extended from the powerhouse to the Fox River, a few hundred feet to the west. The power that was generated, 26,000 volts of 3-phase alternating current, was sent overland via wires on utility poles. two substations, which then transformed the high-voltage alternating current to 600 volts of direct current, which in turn was used to power the train cars via the third rail or overhead trolley wires.
As the AE&C had to bring in large amounts of coal for the power plant, they built a spur off of their Aurora branch between Wheaton and Aurora, with which to transport carloads of coal. The railroad simultaneously used this branch to provide passenger service from rural areas northeast of Aurora to the city of Batavia, with the spur terminating at a station just to the south of Wilson Street and east of the Fox River. But this branch also served a third purpose. Just as other railways of the period had done, the AE&C created their own excursion destination along the Fox River at Glenwood Park, in close proximity to the power plant. The park had many of the same attractions found at Laurelwood Park, including a large park area, a pavilion, a merry-go-round, a dining hall, and boat launches.
The turn into the 20th century was a time of great innovation for much of the world, with the introduction of electricity, automobiles, and even pedal-driven bicycles. In places like Batavia, bicycles were a growing and popular way of getting around town. Bicycle road races from Aurora to Elgin or St. Charles to Batavia were frequent summer events during this time. Despite their popularity, not everyone welcomed their presence on the roads. Local liverymen with carriages for hire saw bicycles as direct competition, and street railroads viewed them as hindering their business. General Manager David Belden estimated that the use of bicycles reduced the Aurora streetcar's daily receipts by $10 to $12 per day, roughly $300 to $400 in 2025 money.
Batavia's iconic stone bridge at Wilson Street was finally taken down and replaced with a new bridge in the latter months of 1911. The new bridge, built with concrete, was 60 feet wide with 3 support arches spanning the river. That same year, Batavia merged its 2 high school districts on both sides of the river into one. A modern new high school building for all Batavia students was built along West Main Street, completed in February of 1915.
In the late summer of 1916, after years of successful operation along the Fox River, the AE&C's 20-year streetcar franchise in Batavia expired, as well as in other neighboring cities. Whereas the railroad was able to quickly negotiate new franchises with the governing bodies of North Aurora, Geneva, St. Charles, and South Elgin, the discussions with Batavia were much more combative. At issue was the amount of annual payment for the streetcar franchise, the repaving of streets between and alongside the rails, the replacement of unsightly utility poles along the road, and perhaps most significant, a major alteration of the railroad's route through the city.
With no settlement agreement by early 1917, and with the two sides still far apart, the Batavia City Council lost patience with the railroad. On January 11th, the City Council passed an ordinance prohibiting the operation of streetcars in their main street after January 22nd, with fines from $25 to $200, or $500 to $4,000 in today's money. Undaunted by the new ordinance, the AE&C dared the city to follow through with their threats. At about 11 a.m. on January 22nd, a northbound Aurora to Elgin car reached the Batavia city limits, operated by 43-year-old motorman Matt Spoden. As the streetcar eased from the east side of the road into the center of Batavia Avenue, the vehicle was stopped by a Batavia police officer, and the unfortunate Spoden was duly arrested.
The AE&C was ready for Batavia's hardball tactics, and had a small fleet of motor cars, buses, and trucks hastily assembled to carry passengers northward or southward through Batavia. Passengers, for their part, viewed the inconvenience and hostilities as something of a lark, despite the colder weather. The young women in particular were said to enjoy the open-air rides of the automobiles.
This awkward transportation arrangement continued on for a few weeks' time, until the City Council and the AE&C came to a special but temporary, agreement, where the AE&C paid $15 per day, or about $300 today, to operate their streetcars through Batavia, while negotiations continued. The two sides were still sharply divided, however, with the AE&C offering to pay the city $750 per annum, or about $15,000 today, while the city was demanding $2,500, or $50,000 today. An agreement was not reached until June of 1917, when the Batavia City Council gave the AE&C a 20-year franchise for the price of $1,400 per year, or about $28,000 today, plus replacement of the wood utility poles with metal poles within 6 years' time, and street repaving as had been done previously in St. Charles.
By 1920, Batavia's population had extended beyond 4,300 residents. Parks and recreation were becoming a more important consideration for the quality of life in cities all across America, including Batavia. 64-year-old Frederick H. Beach, who owned the old Barker Quarry on the west bank of the Fox River to the south of town, donated it to the city of Batavia in 1920. The abandoned quarry had long been a local swimming hole, and the city renovated the property with proper swimming facilities by the early 1930s. It has been a popular park and recreational area ever since, especially after a complete renovation in the early 1990s. Meanwhile, the Levi Newton Library building, standing in the way of Wilson Street, was demolished in 1921, after the purchase of a new library building, the Don Carlos Newton House, just north of the demolished library. Wilson Street finally saw its long-awaited extension westward shortly thereafter.
By the early 1930s, the AE&C Fox River Division had transformed into the Aurora, Elgin, and Fox River Electric Company as a result of the AE&C going into receivership in 1919 and reorganized as two separate companies in 1922 and 1923, the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin Railroad and the AE and FRE Company, which was both the utility and electric trolley system. The Fox River Trolley was struggling, however, largely due to the effects of the Great Depression and competition with automobiles. But it continued to provide hourly service northbound from Aurora and southbound from Elgin, and was used by many in their daily commute to and from work or for their weekly errands.
However, things spiraled quickly downhill for the railway in the mid-1930s. In March 1935, the AE and FRE Board of Directors recommended the immediate abandonment of street railway operations for Aurora and Elgin, followed by the abandonment of the interurban line between those cities. Just a few weeks later, the last trolley cars ran between Aurora and Elgin on Saturday, March 30th, 1935. The next morning, March 31st, the AE and FRE trolley service was replaced by bus service on similar routes north and south.
By the time the interurban abandoned the electric road, plans were already laid to use the right-of-way, typically kept in better shape than the highway, to widen the highway. The following year, starting in mid-August of 1936, the rails inlaid into Batavia Avenue within the Batavia city limits were removed, from north to south, the city recycling and selling off the rails. The removal project took about 1 month and included the repaving of the streets with brickwork where the tracks were removed.
Electric cars continued to run in Batavia, along the east side of the river, as part of the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin Railway, for another 24 years, until 1959, at which time both passenger and freight traffic ceased on the Great Third Rail. But that's a story we cover in other videos.
Continuing our trolley journey south through Batavia, we proceed past Main Street, then Elm Street, Union Avenue, Walnut Street, Blaine Street, and finally Morton Street. A few more stops await us, the first being Stop 26, opposite the West Batavia Cemetery, the Lockwood Hall Stop, so named for the grand house of Judge Samuel D. Lockwood, formerly of New York. The 1849 Greek Revival Mansion, built of Batavia limestone, was home to the Lockwood family in the latter part of the 19th century. The final stop before leaving Batavia is number 25 at Carlisle Road. In addition to being a stop, just a few hundred feet west on the south side of the road once stood the Batavia substation, one of the substations built by the AE&C in the 1920s to power the Fox River trolley system.
Since the Fox River Electric Trolley ceased operations in 1935, the city of Batavia has seen dramatic changes. In 1939, the legendary Revere House Hotel was torn down. Passenger service was halted on the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy in 1943, and the passenger depot was converted to a freight office. The Chicago and Northwestern, which had constructed a new passenger depot made of brick in the late 1910s, followed the lead of the CB&Q as it approached the middle of the 20th century, discontinuing passenger service for their Batavia station. These depot buildings stood resiliently for years thereafter. However, in the mid-1960s, the property upon which the Chicago and Northwestern depot stood was sold. And in spite of good faith efforts by the city of Batavia and the Batavia Historical Society to save the C&NW depot, the structure was torn down on Monday, September 13, 1965. Within a year of this demolition, in 1966, the CB&Q officially ended freight service in Batavia, and the CB&Q depot was closed down after more than 100 years of service.
A few years later, in the early 1970s, just to the south and east of Batavia, the sound of heavy machinery and the movement of vast amounts of earth shook the area. The vaunted National Accelerator Laboratory, today known as Fermilab, was under construction on 6,800 acres of former farmland. As a scientific institution used for particle physics and accelerator research, came to employ a few thousand people, many with advanced science and engineering degrees, the city of Batavia benefited, as a significant portion of them found residence in the quiet riverside community. In fact, Batavia's population swelled to more than 12,000 residents by 1980.
Meanwhile, the abandoned CB&Q passenger depot at Webster and Van Buren was suffering from vandalism and in danger of potential accidents from increased railroad traffic. To set this right, in May of 1969, a group of concerned citizens and businesses purchased the dilapidated structure to preserve it for posterity. The building was donated to the Batavia Park District in 1971, then moved to its current location at the northeast corner of Houston and Water Streets, just 1 block north of the former location of the Chicago and Northwestern Depot, in October of 1973. By 1975, the historic building was made structurally sound and was rendered beautifully restored, becoming the home of the Batavia History Museum, an invaluable resource for the Batavia community. The building was placed on the National Register of Historic Places just a few years later in 1979.
Since then, the city of Batavia has grown to more than 26,000 residents, 7 times its size when the Fox River Trolley was first built. A new pedestrian and cycling bridge was built to span the Fox River in 1999, just north of Wilson Street, leading into Appleton Park, a revitalized community space repurposed from a former industrial area. In 2001, Batavia proudly opened a new public library, over 55,000 square feet in size, along State Street. Complementing the city's main thoroughfare, in 2008, the Wilson Street Bridge was reconstructed, replacing the concrete bridge built 95 years prior, and featuring 10-foot wide sidewalks, octagonal overlooks, and seating areas. The community's primary employers now include Fermilab, Suncast Corporation, Aldi, and Aggo, a manufacturer of agricultural machinery. Over the span of almost 2 centuries, the river settlement of Batavia has evolved into a city rich in memories and traditions, proud of its education system, its public library, its expanding park system, and its enduring heritage.
As always, many thanks to our Be Historic channel community, our subscribers, our Super Thanks contributors, and our generous Patreon supporters and other benefactors. If you're enjoying these videos, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, share, and hype via the hype button. And if you're so inclined, consider supporting our channel via Patreon. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you, in a manner of speaking, in our next video adventure.